Hi guys, it's now 3 minutes past 10 and we started to do these questions at about 43. Can you believe it's taken 20 minutes to do those? Right, let's get to the answers. Okay, the two companies which exited the East Coast Main Line, Nicole? Virgin and Stagecoach, thank you. Who had the majority stake in that, Nicole? With what share? How much? 90, correct. 90%. Okay. Question two rather, which, ladies and gentlemen, we have discussed a little bit because it was throwing a few people off the scent. In what way can this process of withdrawal be compared to the euro? Okay. The worry is that if Stagecoach and Virgin give up their franchise, what's the big worry with other franchise holders? Exactly. The big worry is that they'll want to walk out on their deals as well. And as it says in that article, there are a number of others who are also going to be in the same boat as Stagecoach and Virgin, in that they're going to struggle to make the necessary payments and to make any profit. Now, in what way is that similar to the euro, Dylan?
Greece.
The worry is
Greece.
that the founding fathers of the euro, which are Germany and France, have done everything in their power to keep
Greece.
For example, Greece, a highly indebted nation, within the, the warm arm, that big bear hug of the euro, because they're worried that if other malcontents would think, we're not really happy with this thing called the euro, which is supposed to be a once you're in forever and a day scenario. So that would have terrible consequences, as our learned colleague here, Connor, said, with regard to confidence in the euro. And then the value of it would start to plummet. So in the same way, they're trying to hold everything together here and very reluctantly let Virgin and Stagecoach walk away from this. But the danger is that other companies will do the same. Okay, number 3. Rebecca, don't mind. Explain the factors which have led to the company's decisions to exit the market.
Well, Brexit's dented consumer confidence.
Okay, number 1, Brexit has dented consumer confidence. Right, now we don't need to be doing this, if you don't mind, whilst we're going through the answers to the questions. Secondly,
petrol prices have fallen, so people are using their cars instead of taking trains.
Okay, now at the time of writing of the article, that was certainly true. Not so true at the moment when petrol prices are at 1.30 a litre and going up and up. But yes, petrol prices at the time of writing of the article were falling, and people were finding it maybe more cost effective, or certainly not as expensive anyway, to use their cars, which are generally more convenient. Although there's a great article on the BBC this morning about young people saying, we don't need a car, and this is how easy it is to get by without a car. I would like to get by without a car, I think. It'd be a big bonus not to have to pay for a car, pay insurance, pay tax, pay petrol, pay depreciation costs. It's so costly to have a car. It'd be great not to have to rely upon one, wouldn't it? Okay, next point.
Well, I wrote about network real, but then it turned out that was the next question.
Say that again, please.
I wrote about network real, but then that turned out it was question 4.
Okay, did anyone have any other parts to this answer? Any other factors? Yes?
That the revenue...
Because that's not them all, certainly.
The revenue didn't increase as it was forecasted.
Correct. The forecasts, and we often talk, don't we, in evaluating essays, especially to do with data. Data is often based upon forecasts which can be inaccurate. Well, what a great example. The forecasted revenue and the predicted numbers of people who would start using the train did not actually materialise in real life and didn't measure up to the forecasts. So you're not bringing the necessary revenues in. Therefore, you can't make the necessary premium payments. Yes.
Initially they bid too aggressively for the franchise.
And so paid over the odds to win the franchise in the first place. Yeah. And was there not something, there's one other thing as well, I believe, having read it myself yesterday.
Was there
Sydney, ladies and gentlemen.
Was there one about terrorism and industrial action?
And what about, okay, so there are two more. And what about it? Terrorism and industrial action. What did industrial action do? Obviously, if you know trains running and people are on strike, you're not bringing any revenue in. Okay, and what about, there's one other thing as well about the rail infrastructure.
Isn't that network rail though?
Okay. Are you saying that's the answer to question 4?
Yeah.
Yes, Philip. Okay, Philip, number 4. In what way is Network Rail to blame? So, first of all, who or what is Network Rail?
Well, they own the lines.
They what, sorry?
They own all the rail.
Okay, so they're responsible for the maintenance and the upkeep of the railway infrastructure. Okay, so if you're a train operating company, you don't have to worry about that, which is great, because that means you don't have to meet this enormous sunk cost to get started. You don't need to worry about that. Yes?
However, they weren't upkeeping the rails, and therefore
Speak up, please, Philip.
they weren't upkeeping the rails, and
They
therefore,
weren't upkeeping the rails. What do you mean by that?
well, they weren't giving it the upgrades that it needed.
Especially to run what sort of trains?
He wanted just 2 trains.
Exactly, the new fast trains. Correct, super fast.
So Virgin and Stagecoach had to put the cost there, and that slowed business down as well.
Okay, yes. So the Network Rail, the state-owned organisation, is not entirely sort of hands-free on this. They're culpable as well. Okay. And then let's move to the second article, question 1, and then question 2 is going to take, there's a lot to say. There's a lot to say about question 2. Compare the train operating company's premiums with Network Rail's taxpayer funds. Okay, Alex, thank you.
So the company paid £817 million.
800 and
17 million pounds.
817 million. And who does that payment go to?
The government.
The government, okay, but go on.
The government paid out £4 billion tax payment.
Is it 4 billion? Is that what it is?
4 billion.
Everyone's that was to say 4 billion, not 3.
It says 4 billion.
4 billion, okay. 4 billion. So 4 times more, 4 and a bit times more of taxpayers' money going to still prop up the railway network. Okay. So it's you can see here it is a very complex business when you're trying to introduce competition into something like this, the railway network and the infrastructure. Okay. Right, now let's get stuck into a little bit of pros, cons of nationalisation versus privatisation. This will be quite a big thing, really, quite lengthy, I would anticipate. It's a pity you don't have a board that you can just sort of press a button and it sort of erases. That would be a great invention. What? It's there? Alright, okay. Somebody's beaten me to it on that one. Somebody's already patented that one. But even that, I mean writing with this sort of thing and then press a button and it disappears. I don't like writing on these.
They should have window wipers like that.
Window wipers.
You press a button and it
They've got a multiplicity of uses, haven't they? I like window wipers.
Yeah.
Yeah? Right, okay.
No, it's the shut down. That's the tech department or what?
Pros, cons. Right, okay, so let's just have a few of these ideas then, please, to start off with. Radhika, privatisation, pros, if you've got any for it.
Or, isn't it? It's got
Advantages, sorry?
less tax.
Okay, so it means that tax revenue, taxpayer money can be used for other things, which is very essential, isn't it? Especially when we're all living longer, for example, Radhika. It's very important, isn't it? Stump up the money for the NHS, maybe. Okay, so it might reduce pressure on government budgets. And certainly, when the networks and so on are first sold off, you get a big cash injection there for the government. So, it certainly will do that, Radhika. Can you think of anything else, Radhika? Okay, Sydney.
Is it more efficient?
Why?
Because like a private firm would want to make more profit.
Thank you. A private firm, what's its probably going to be its sole objective? Profit maximisation. In order to maximise profits, you need to minimise costs and maximise, well, it's the same thing. So you minimise costs, maximise.
Efficiency.
No, you're just randomly shouting things out. Okay. Minimise costs and maximise revenue. Correct. So there's a profit motive, and driving that will be the desire to be efficient. So you might be more, what type of efficient, more efficient might you be, Nathan?
Productive.
You might be more productively efficient, correct? So you might be down at P equals min ATC potentially. If you're wanting to make a profit, will you be at P equals MC? If you want to make lots and lots of profit, would you be at P equals MC?
Would P be greater than MC?
Correct. So it's unlikely that P would equal marginal cost, because if you think about your monopoly, for example, there's the marginal cost, but there's your profit. And the reason that you're making all of that profit is because price is much bigger than marginal cost. So it's probably unlikely that P will be equal to marginal cost. Yes, Philip?
The innovative.
The innovative, okay, yeah. R&D, research and development, new products, innovation, stay ahead of the competition, and all that jazz, yes. Anything else? Connor? So you want to have more customers on the railways, let's say. So what's your railway going to have to be? The service that you provide. In theory, this is.
It should produce good quality goods or services.
It should have a high quality. So what should be good about it?
Price competitive.
Okay.
Quality competitive.
But what do you mean by quality competitive? How would you sort of measure quality competitive in the railway industry? The train services are
Well,
one a day,
there's many trains. There's many trains. Back and forth.
frequent,
Yeah.
and do they run to a timetable?
Well, online.
Obviously. So they're frequent, they're on time, they're
Reliable.
reliable, they're clean, etc. So all of those things would apply. You would expect frequent, on time, reliable, clean. That would be my big bugbear, cleanliness. Okay, what about disadvantages? Robert?
In order to cut costs
Okay, I'm thinking about the Hatton Garden Rail crash tragedy a few years ago, 10 years, a bit more than that now.
Will they cut corners?
They will cut corners to minimise costs, which in the rail industry, or anything where you're dealing with things moving at fast pace, that is potentially very dangerous. So they may cut corners on safety. So just to make a profit, they might then start cutting corners which shouldn't be cut. So it might be certain safety issues. I mean, who wants to get on a 120 mile an hour train if you think that certain corners have been cut? I certainly wouldn't. Would you? Okay, number 2. Nathan.
So, like,
John Locke Institute, 12th to the 25th of August. One. France.
those can go bankrupt and then they'll require potentially a bailout. So, if they don't get any profit, then they'll.
Okay, now, why? Because if it was a normal company, say I owned a fish and chip shop, and it wasn't doing so well, and I went bankrupt, is the government going to come and say, "Oh, here you go, Jaco. Don't worry, we'll bail out your cod and chips. We'll bail out your scampi fries. We'll bail you out." So what's the difference? Why will they bail out the transport, the railway company, and not my fish and chip shop? Alex Keith.
Because the transport industry is a lot more important.
What? Sorry.
The transport industry is a lot more important for the economy.
It's not. It's one would almost say that it's absolutely essential. Yes.
Is building up a transport company an example of a supply side policy?
A supply side policy. Why?
Because if you bail out a company, rather than increasing aggregate supply, you're just maintaining it. Because if the company went bust, then aggregate supply would reduce.
But I don't think that you would find that, in sort of the Chancellor's list of, let's introduce a minimum wage, let's introduce such and such, number 3 on the list, let's bail out companies. So I get your point, but I don't think you would ever suggest that that's a legitimate supply side policy. But, I mean, you're true, and obviously you're right in what you're saying. Okay, so number 2 would be what? There's enormous cost, potentially, to the taxpayer if everything goes belly up. So, enormous taxpayer funded bailout costs. Okay, now there's one really sort of obvious thing. When British Rail was British Rail, it was a public sector.
I was going to say, would the tickets be more expensive?
Maybe. But how would you describe British Rail when it was owned by the government? A public sector what? Was there a Scottish Rail, a Northern Ireland Rail? Yeah, actually there was, because I went to school every day on Northern Ireland Railways, so there was. But on mainland Britain, so, do you know what I mean by mainland Britain? Do you know what that means? Rebecca?
Yeah.
What does it mean? We used to describe, when we were at school, we used to talk about people who lived, for example, say Newcastle, as those people who live on the mainland. So what did we mean by that?
We'll just in the mainland. I don't know.
So there's a map. So where's mainland Britain?
Like in the middle.
No. Scotland, Wales and England.
Right, okay. So we meant people who were living here as opposed to living over here in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, of course, being part of the United Kingdom. Okay. Border potentially going up north and south, Brexit problems. Let's not get into that. Okay, so there was British Rail, so it was a public sector. There was nothing else. So it was a public sector what? It was the industry, it was the firm, it was a public sector monopoly. Thank you. Now, that public sector monopoly is then sold to, let's say, Stagecoach, because it had 90%. So when you privatise something, and you sell it, and you move it from public sector to private sector, you're just moving a public sector monopoly and making it a private sector monopoly, oftentimes. Because you don't have Virgin competing with, I don't know, Go Ahead or whatever, to run trains north and south. It's just the one operator. So oftentimes it just becomes private sector monopoly, having been public sector. So you simply move from public sector monopoly to private sector. Now, the public sector monopoly is less likely because they're interested in your welfare, potentially, so they're less likely to do what to prices?
I was going to say less likely.
Philip. They're less likely to put them high. What stops the private sector banging prices up? Because there is something there to stop it.
The consumers won't pay.
Nope. So every year when season ticket prices are published, you get the whole hoo-ha on the news media about, they've introduced price increases of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%. And then there is something and somebody who looks at this and says, either yes you can do it or no you can't. Who is it? Excuse me?
The CMA.
The CMA? No. But it is along those lines.
Chris Green.
The Secretary of State for Transport? No. Who looks at it? Who looks at whether or not EDF can increase its prices by 10% a year? Who looks at whether Northumbrian Water can bang their prices up by 10% a year? Because these are in the private sector, but the government knows that they are potentially private sector monopolies, and so they've got a mechanism in place to make sure that 20% you're having a laugh, and they say you can't do this. So who is it that Nicole?
I'm not sure.
Okay, Nicole, if you're not sure, best just tell everybody. Daniel Coulson. The regulator. There's a regulator. The real regulator will come in and say whether or not something is a bit excessive or okay, that's within remit. So there's a regulator. So one way of ensuring that the private sector monopoly doesn't sort of start getting, bully boy and introducing enormous price rises is that they say, okay, privatise, but privatise and regulate. Give an example of a regulator of schools, Rebecca. Ofsted. So we have the same thing applying across the energy sector, the water sector, the transport sector, because there's this recognition that actually you're just moving from that to that. So we need to sort of step in here and make sure that consumers aren't ripped off all the time. Okay, now, just one final point on this. On the diagram, we've talked about the fact that the private firm is probably going to be more cost effective. Now, if that's the case, so now what's maybe going to happen to ATC? And what would happen to your abnormal profit area? Potentially, yes. Okay. Right. Now let's have a think then about nationalised. Right, so what are the advantages of nationalised industry? Alex?
The easy to regulate.
Okay, well, it's sort of self-regulating because you own it. Anything else?
I guess the more concern in terms of the welfare of the...
Right, okay. So the primary objective may be slightly different. So what might the primary objective be? Rather than just we're going to maximise profit all the time? We're going to...
Provide a better service.
Okay, well, provide an something service, not necessarily better. Certainly, maybe that's not the experience of people who travelled under British Rail. Provide...
A fair service?
Okay, another word for fair?
Equal.
Equitable. So what would that mean in terms of price? One which all could afford, or a more affordable service. Now if it's more affordable, in terms of prices, is that a good thing or a bad thing, necessarily, Serena?
Good thing.
Excuse me?
A good thing.
For whom?
Us. More affordable.
Okay. Would it be a bad thing for anybody?
Possibly benefit lower prices.
Okay, so there's a sort of balancing act to be done there. Okay. Next. Public sector firms are oftentimes very, in terms of efficiency.
Inefficient.
Okay. What do you call the inefficiency associated with public sector organisations?
X inefficiency.
They are inefficient, right?
How's that for?
Oh, sorry, it's not. Thank you. Gosh, the day has come, ladies and gentlemen, when I've had to rely upon Philip Tatulovich to keep me on track here. Thank you, Philip. That's excellent. Obviously, that was a deliberate mistake, just to see if you were awake. Okay. Right. Okay. Sorry about that. We'll put that in the cons section then. X inefficient. What's another word for that, Philip?
Public sector.
Organisational slack. Okay, how would that be represented on the diagram? Organisational slack. Nicole.
Would it be that the price is a minimum ATC?
Well, it would mean that your ATC in general would be...
Will be increased?
Oh, so maybe your ATCs, rather than being there, your ATCs might be there. And if they were there at ATC 2, then actually your profit goes from that rather large section to this much smaller section. Now that, of course, in itself brings its own problems. Less money to reinvest, less money to develop, less money to bring in new rolling stock, all of those things. Thank you, Roshan. Okay, now if you haven't already done so, make a note of that on your diagram, please. Or maybe on a new diagram, might be better.